event was held for volunteers last May, and the results were shared now, but the final report of the SWEP event is now completed. No doubt the audience today here is very varied. If you've got any questions or things that you'd like to share as we're going along, you can put those in the chat. We'll be having a short question and answers session at the end. The format for today is that Sue is up first and she's going to report back on the SWEP project. We anticipate it'll be around about 10:45, 10 to 11 when this finishes. We'll have a quick 5-minute comfort break then, and then at 11 o'clock, Sue is stepping in to do a policy update too. She'll be followed by Anne Bunker, and then, as I say, at the end, somewhere between sort of 11:30, 22, we're going to have questions and answers. If, as we're going along, you've got like to ask at the end, please do stick them in the chat. Help you remember there's lots of information that's going to be shared this morning, so it's a good idea to put them in there, and we'll make sure that they get addressed at the end. Obviously, the event is being recorded, as is the chat, so if there's things that we should be aware of or reports that you want to share with us too, please do put links to those into the chat. So, without much more from me, I would like to hand over to Sue now, and she'll explain to all the amazing work that went on during the SWEP project.
Great, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'll just get that going. Just a second. Trying to swap over my screens and it's not letting me. Okay. There we go. Right, sorry about that. So thank you very much for joining us today. So the idea behind this is basically to sort of have a wider sharing event. As Tim said, we had a feedback to all the project partners and participants and volunteers in May last year. So this is basically to share with you the experiences that we had with the SWEP project, surveying the waterway environment for pollution threats, which was a volunteer project that ran. We recruited volunteers in about August, September 2018, and then we did field work between about November 2018 and March 2019. So the funding for SWEP came from NRW's competitive grant, so that's great. It's really enabled it to actually happen. All the photographs that we have in these slideshows today are from either project partners or mainly from our volunteers. After the NRW funded period came to an end, we also had some other funding from the Campaign for National Parks. We were very proud to have won a national award from the Campaign for National Parks called the Park Protector Award 2019. And that gave us £2,000 as well. So we were able to use that to sort of write a very thorough full project report with appendices to help people to replicate the methodology if they want to in other places. So that prize money enabled us to do that. We also had funding from Pembrokeshire Nature Partnership, and that is actually funding this SWEP sharing event. It was going to be an event back in March, but obviously now it's this virtual event, which is great. It means more of you can take part. And we've also got some funding from the Nature Partnership for some more water testing kits, which are going to be used over this autumn and winter. So introducing you to the SWEP team. I sort of was the project lead. I work for the relevant authorities group for the Pembrokeshire Marine Special Area of Conservation. I'm hosted by the Port of Milford Haven and work on behalf of all of the relevant authorities for the Special Area Conservation, the SAC. And I was working with West Wales Rivers Trust, the Darwin Centre, which is sort of like an educational establishment independent in Pembrokeshire, and obviously Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum. And here's lots of our lovely volunteers back in May 2019. Some of those were at our feedback event. So very briefly, where did this come from? Obviously, I'm a marine biologist. Why am I getting involved in sort of land-based management? Well, obviously, you know, what happens on the land affects what's going on in the sea. I've been the SAC officer now since 2000, so 20 years. In 2002, we actually had an issues public consultation, and agricultural runoff in particular came up as the third highest priority issue from the public back then. This is a map of the whole SAC, so it's a very large site. The sites we have in Wales tend to be large for the special areas of conservation. So we obviously saw that, you know, we needed to do something about agricultural runoff from the land, and we basically left it to our terrestrial counterparts to sort out, and it's still an issue. So that's why we thought we'd try and help out with the SWET project. So that the main objectives really were to better understand the levels of nutrient pollution on a local scale within the Milford Haven Waterway area, and basically to supplement NRW's monitoring. So that's Natural Resources Wales, to supplement their statutory monitoring. We wanted to use citizen science, so we wanted to recruit pairs of volunteers to do surveys on the foreshore where there was public access. And the idea was to record all the freshwater inputs into the waterway, not just your streams, every single freshwater input that they came across on their stretch, and to test a handful of those for levels of nitrate and levels of phosphate pollution using Kairitsu pack test kits from Japan. To add value to those surveys, and also to sort of make it more interesting for the participants, and basically, yeah, make use of their time out in the field, we wanted them to record all the pollution concerns and also non-native species and general things of interest as well, to really sort of make the most of their time. And we wanted really to raise awareness of the issue of nitrate pollution. And the impacts on the marine environment. I think it's been very handy to sort of take that step back and look at the effect on the marine environment. It's not just rivers, it's the whole marine system that it is affecting. So the Milford Haven Waterway here in Pembrokeshire, it's got a huge catchment, so it's not surprising that we have issues with water quality. So that pink area you can see there is the area that feeds into what we call the outer Milford Haven catchment area, and the grey area, which is massive, is most of the county, ends up draining into the Milford Haven Waterway. We had sort of various stretches that we needed to sort of divide up within the waterway. Initially, we were hoping for like 18 volunteers maybe, one education group, which was through Darwin, and also doing some canoe surveys for difficult areas to sort of reach. So, you know, we put out a call for volunteers, and we were like overwhelmed with the number of volunteers that wanted to take part. It was absolutely fantastic response, really, really keen people who wanted to sort of get involved in their local area. It actually got to the point where I had to say no, which was awful. But we ended up with 46 pairs of volunteers, which meant that we could basically do the entire waterway, which was amazing. We also had input from Cardiff University, and those canoe trips. We ran 4 canoe trips. The Coastal Forum sorted that via Martin at Sea Kayak Guides, and they were really, really popular. They were wonderful and really helped us to get to some areas that it's just impossible to sort of visit on foot. So the Milford Haven Waterway, you know, it's very extensive and it's very, very varied. Then the length of the stretches that we sort of assigned to volunteers varied hugely, because it depended on, you know, access, whether they had to walk up the same stretch and back again, or access it from one point and exit at another. We also sort of very heavily depended on our volunteers' local knowledge, which was really, really useful. I managed to satisfy my health and safety manager's requirements for through a 7-page risk assessment, so that was all ticked off. We wanted to keep our volunteers safe. So the first thing that we wanted our volunteers to do was to sort of log all of the freshwater inputs. Obviously these varied according to rainfall. It was quite a rainy winter over that 2018-2019 period. December was the heaviest, but we did see sort of quite extensive flooding in November. So the freshwater inputs were not just talking streams, and obviously there are lots of major and minor streams feeding into the Milford Haven Waterway, but we're also talking about urban drainage, various pipes pop up all over the place, and also the rural runoff. This was probably the most varied, anything from tiny trickles off banks to waterfalls off cliffs. And you often sort of saw where the fresh water was coming from. If you sort of looked over the mud flats or the beaches, you could see the trickles coming, going across the shore. So we wanted our volunteers to take photographs of every single water input. This acted as a great record, and it also gave us information, although they did record information on sort of flow, depth, width of the input itself. But the main reason for doing this was to try and get an accurate location record. On all smartphones these days, you can check in the properties of your photographs, and it automatically logs latitude and longitude, which most of the time is correct, not all the time. That was the easiest way to make sure that we had a very good and accurate location of where the data was coming from. Obviously now there are different applications. There's one called Open Data Kit, which is particularly good because it's open source. That can be customized. You can put in whatever sort of forms you want. So there's some sort of, some really good other examples out there. So Freshwater Watch has got a fairly seamless app where it's possible to integrate your data in all your various forms. So that there are ways to sort of improve on data collation, because it was probably the most time-consuming part of the project, was making sure, checking that all the data as it came in. I think applications would really help to ease that process. But for our fairly low-key, low-budget SWET project, all of our information was either recorded manually or via Google Forms and Excel spreadsheets. I do want to say a massive thank you to the Freshwater Habitats Trust, and through them also Earthwatch. I'm a great believer in not recreating the wheel, and they helped hugely by allowing us to use their fabulous Clean Water for Wildlife resources, which were developed through a Heritage Lottery grant. And also they gave us help with acquiring water testing kits. It was basically their use and positive evaluation of the pack test kits that was the cornerstone around which SWET was built. So we made use of their resources, integrated them into our volunteer pack information, impacts information, survey guidance and health and safety. All of this is replicated within the final report appendices, which are also provided as a Word document as well as PDF to enable reuse. So, having trained and given packs of information to all of our volunteers, it was time to get them out in the field and testing for nitrates and phosphates, among other things. So we got them out and did surveys over 4 months. So they repeated their same survey stretch over 4 months, November, December, January, February, which is a good time for sort of picking up levels of nitrates and phosphates. And I'm actually going to, because I love a bit of show and tell, I've got some of the tubes here. So very small tubes. So this is what they look like. Inside they have a little bit of reagent in the bottom. And effectively all you do is you pull out a little nylon tab in the top. You see, this is the phosphate one. There's tubes for various different things. I'm going to have to be careful not to put all this on my keyboard. And effectively then you just squeeze out the air. There's a tiny hole in the top of the tube. Squeeze the air out, invert it into your water sample. This is a sample I got earlier this morning from one of the streams of the Milford Haven Waterway. Make sure you get enough sucked up into the tube. You can do this directly from your water source, or you can, as I did, scoop some up and then get it up into your tube. Give it a good shake. Alex, could you sort of set a timer for 5 minutes? This is a phosphate tube, and they take 5 minutes to for the colour change to come.
No problem.
Thank you. Sorry, I just accidentally pressed something there, didn't I? And I'm also going to do the nitrate one. I'll just do the nitrate one while I'm messing about. The nitrate only takes 3 minutes, so 3 minutes from now, please, Alex, for that nitrate one. Right, let me just get back to my settings. Sorry about that. So, we had about 900 tests over the whole survey period, and then effectively you're comparing them against, this is our survey guidance sheet, and you are comparing those colours against a colour chart. Roughly, and it does depend on how much you're bulk buying in, roughly for each sort of pair of tubes, nitrate and phosphate, it costs approximately £3. But that does vary on how many you're getting in. Obviously, the more you buy, the cheaper it works out. So our volunteers were quite ingenious in the way they were sampling. Sometimes, as I say, you can just get it directly from the water source by sucking up in a little trickle that's coming across the shore. And sometimes it was a case of dangling a container in to pick up your water sample. Quite important is that these tests are for fresh water only. So we had to make sure that we didn't have any saltwater contamination. So sometimes it was following the stream up a little bit from the foreshore to make sure you've got a freshwater sample. There are lots of different tests that Kairitsu do. There's one, for example, for ammoniacal nitrogen that you can do in seawater, but they seem to do tests for everything. It's quite amazing. So the results that we had, these are the results for nitrate. So this is across the 4 months of survey. So I know these are very sort of tiny on your screen, but basically sort of the darker the blob, the more concentrated the nitrate sample. And basically we're looking at an awful lot of samples that are above 2 to 5 parts per million. And so they are effectively considered to be polluted. We did expect a wide scatter of high data points. That's why we were doing the project in the first place. So that wasn't unexpected, but you know, there were an awful lot of areas that were high. So we've really been able to sort of to show that through the project. Phosphate wasn't as high, only a few areas, although I'm going to repeat some of those next month just to make sure that we've got accurate results, because the phosphate in particular, the results, the water sample needs to not be too cold, and we were quite cold over that winter period, so they could have been.
So just quickly, Sue, sorry, the nitrate timer should be up now.
That's great timing. So I'm going to show you the nitrate one. That's gone quite a dark pink in that 3-minute period. So if we're going to compare it against our nitrate coloration here, you can see that it's definitely within those two upper amounts there. I think looking at that, I would probably say that's the upper boundary. So we're looking at probably 10 parts per million there, 10 milligrams per litre. So that's a highly polluted input for nitrate. Check the phosphate one in a second. So we did actually do some comparisons between the NRW lab sort of statutory monitoring samples and our pack test kits. And it's not unexpected that the pack tests aren't as accurate, obviously, as laboratory analysed samples. But in line with previous studies, we did find that, they did record levels of pollution, fairly accurately within boundaries. If anything, they under-recorded. But for a sort of rapid and cost-effective way to sort of identify pollution across large areas, we thought it was very, very effective.
Okay, it's time for the phosphate one.
Whee, and the alarm's gone off. The phosphate, it's not quite so easy to see. So the phosphate comparing against this bottom one here, it's not completely white, it's not completely clear, sorry. So we're probably, I'd probably put that in that second colour category. And we also, it's important to point out, you're measuring a range. So you're not saying it's exactly the same as a particular sort of like colour change there. You're saying it's a range. So this one here, I'd probably put in that range, which is 0.05 to 0.1 parts per million. So there we go. That's how easy it is, how easy it was, how easy it is to use those test results. And I think the really useful thing about them is the instant result that you can see. So obviously we went through a lot of data analysis, but I just wanted to sort of like share that we had 2 undergraduate students who based their theses on the SWEP project, and they both got firsts, which was excellent. So that was Reese Francis and Abigail Gill from Cardiff. And also, their results were useful in the actual final report for SWEPT as well. So thank you to them. So as well as the actual water quality results, we also got our volunteers to check visually for signs of algal mats. So algal mats is when the mudflats are basically looking green as a result of the elevated nutrients. NRW do monitor this in the summer months when growth is at its peak, but we did find that it was still quite obvious in November, and that was useful to sort of pass on. We also got volunteers to look out for other signs of pollution whilst they were doing their surveys. We had one incident of contaminated oil output from a pipe near an industrial centre. That was swiftly followed up actually, so that was very useful. Fly tipping, we had a few sites, and also a few slurry incidents, and they were all reported to NRW fairly swiftly, and they were all, I'm happy to say, followed up and resolved. We asked volunteers to record the amounts of marine litter, the plastic pollution, especially on their survey stretches, and particularly upriver, there's some areas where that accumulates, the tidal sort of flow accumulates those into some areas. And Anne will say a little bit more about that, but I will just say that I took part in one of the subsequent cleanups, and I was crouched under the tree canopy there with a big sack. I managed to completely fill a large sack with tins and bottles without even moving. There was an extraordinary amount up there. Well, this was one lovely example. This little plastic pigeon belongs to Haverfordwest Business Circle, and it managed to find its way from Haverfordwest downstream, sort of 4 to 6 miles downstream, which is a great example of the sort of kind of city-to-sea transportation. Yeah, this pigeon was given a helping hand to return to its roost in Haverfordwest. Abandoned boats was an issue. We knew that there were abandoned boats around about in various places, but actually the extent and the number of them was a little bit surprising. And they can obviously also be a pollution threat. You've got, you know, disused batteries on board that have got the ability to leak and things like that. And we'll say a little bit more about that later. We asked our volunteers to look out for signs of non-native species, both on public footpaths where they were adjacent to the foreshore, and also if they were on the foreshore itself. So we had sort of slipper limpets and Pacific oysters that were sort of picked up, so we kind of knew that they were around as non-natives on the shore. Off the shore, we have sort of, you know, laurel and Himalayan balsam, and Japanese knotweed and things like that. We also had some otter spraint that was recorded, and you know, various seals and things of interest that people were able to sort of fling through and say, oh, can you tell me what this is? So hopefully the volunteers found that interesting as well as adding value to their time out on the shore. A huge part of the SWEP project was to raise awareness of the whole issue of nutrient pollution. And I think it did this really well. We had lots of sort of reports in various magazines and media. This was really helped actually by us winning the national award from the Campaign for National Parks. So that really did help to sort of raise the issue. I think a lot of people seem to think that nitrate and phosphate pollution is all about freshwater rivers and fish kills and things like that. But actually, sort of by standing back and saying, look, this is an issue for our marine areas, I think it's very useful. I think it's fair to say that our volunteers really enjoyed taking part. Obviously, there's a great health and well-being aspect, getting people out and about, enjoying their local areas, and also actually sort of feeling like they're making a difference and having a purpose to their outings. That was really appreciated. There's some lovely quotes there from SWEP volunteers. You know, SWEP's been intellectually stimulating. It's even provoked me to read a short book about farming. And also, you know, they then talked about the project and what they're doing with their family and their friends and the local community. So that's a great way of sort of sharing, you know, what the issue is and how these people have been able to contribute to hopefully trying to sort of resolve it long term. In terms of education, we also worked with LEAF. So Jane Powell at LEAF developed some resources for schools, particularly through working with Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum. And we provided some testing tubes for school students to use as part of those studies. But really, really good resources there available on the LEAF website. And we also sort of raised awareness through other initiatives, for example, BRICS, which was a project on the go at the time in Pembrokeshire, building resilience in catchments, and that's something that I sat on a steering group for, Pembrokeshire was very much involved in. And through that project, we were able to sort of like raise awareness directly with the agricultural industry of the fact that SWEP was happening and what we were doing, things like that, and update them. So conclusions then, well, basically all our project objectives were achieved and surpassed, which was brilliant, and that's mainly due to the excellent volunteer uptake and participation. The instant results that we gained are a valuable and excellent aid to raising awareness of nutrient pollution. Citizen science and the use of pack test kits make a very effective contribution to improved environmental understanding and management. And these results are helping to inform Natural Resources Wales evidence review of the status of the Milford Haven Waterway. And we'll talk about that a little more. And I thought somebody might ask a question about total costs. So I just thought it would be interesting to sort of put this in. So basically I totaled up actually what we have, the basically overall physical budget that we had, and this is including the grant from Natural Resources Wales, a cash match from West Wales Rivers Trust, and also from the Pembrokeshire Marine Special Conservation Relevant Authorities Group, the award prize money, and also the funding from the Pembrokeshire Nature Partnership. So that total cost was just over £17,000. Obviously, additional to this was the extensive in-kind contributions from the volunteers and project partners. But I think it just goes to show that things are possible to achieve without costing the earth. And if you involve the right people, you can actually get a lot for your money. So some of the recommendations they're obviously sort of detailed in the SWEP report, but the top three, if you like, are that widespread nitrate pollution is occurring in the Milford Haven Waterway. This was really highlighted by SWEP, and that does need to be reduced, bottom line. And investigation and implementation of methods to do that is urgently required. This has been a long issue and it's not getting any better. And yeah, it needs to be reduced. Any citizen science project needs a central coordinator. You can get a lot from your volunteers, but you do need to make sure that it's well organised and that the volunteers feel well supported. And then applying SWEP methodology elsewhere would benefit land environmental management as well as public participation and awareness. And then immediate insights into local nutrient levels could also be gained by individual land managers and farmers conducting their own monitoring. That would be really good to see. So the survey report is available there on the SAC website. There's a latest news page and there's links to it there. Health warning, that website needs a substantial update. It's on the to-do list. So basically that report summarises the data collected and it acts as a blueprint for other reports elsewhere, hopefully, to ensure that SWEP can be easily replicated if desired. And then surveying the Welsh environment for pollution threats does continue. We've got some repeat sampling and some open coast testing occurring next month, and that's in partnership with Pembrokeshire Coastal National Park Authority. And then hopefully we've got application of SWEP methodology in other catchments. There's discussions underway there. And, monitoring by farmers to aid individual farm plans is also on the cards as part of a much larger sort of possibly UK-wide project. And there's discussions underway about that as well. So I'm just hoping that our experience, particularly related to the marine environment, can be sort of picked up by others and used to help supplement the evidence base that we do have. And hopefully in the future, pick up improvements. Wouldn't that be nice to see? And then finally, if you've got any queries or if you want any practical advice that's not in the report and the appendices, then please feel free to get in touch and we can help us if we can. Okay, thank you very much. So obviously any questions, can we kind of leave them to the Q&A session? Hopefully if there's things that have been going into the chat, then Alex and Tim can pick that up. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've been busy noting your questions down, whether they are in the chat or through the chat function. We're running slightly ahead of time and we're going to take advantage of that. We'll have a short 5-minute break now. So if people want to pop and get themselves a cup of tea or go to the loo or all those kind of things and stroke the dog, now is your chance. And then we're just going to have a change over here.
That's it. Disappointingly, we couldn't get any updates from Welsh Government or NRW, so you've got what I've been able to pull together. So recapping then, what are we trying to manage? So in this large catchment of the Milford Haven Waterway, it's really the cumulative impact of nutrient pollution from runoff that's the big issue. Agricultural runoff is a concern due primarily to slurry spreading. And slurry spreading wise, well, you know, slurry is a fertiliser. It's very valuable, but unfortunately it's often viewed as a waste byproduct that needs disposing of. This can build up as farms have expanded and herd sizes, particularly dairy, have increased, although we're not just talking dairy, we're talking, well, we are for slurry, sorry. Slurry storage has often not been updated to match that. There are regulations for storage of slurry, and there are regulations for if a direct pollution is caused. But there is very little legislation in place to tackle nutrient overloading through things like runoff. There are agricultural codes of practice that farms should follow, but they're not legislation and therefore not enforceable. And that was something I really didn't realise at the start of this project. That was quite a surprise to me, and also to lots of the volunteers as well. You just assume that sort of thing is legislation, but it's not. It is a code of practice. And through, you know, work that I do in the marine environment solely, you know, for example, sort of bait digging, you know, codes of practice are generally not sufficient for commercial activities. You're not, if you wanted to compare that to like the highway code, for instance, that's a code we're all aware of. It gives us general rules to abide by, but we don't all stick to it all the time. It's really the specific speed limits and driving laws and local traffic controls that really manage our vehicle use. So I think wherever you have a code of conduct, when there's a commercial operation underway, that needs to be backed up with other legislation. So who is actually responsible for protecting the environment from damaging effects of high intensity food production? Well, NRW monitor and regulate and help deliver Welsh Government and European Union policies and priorities, and they also provide conservation advice. They want to work with farmers to make sure they get the most out of the valuable nutrients in the slurry, while making sure that there's no slurry entering watercourses. There's a lot of information about slurry storage and things like do not apply within 48 hours of heavy rain, and if the land is waterlogged and things like that. Most farmers have a manure management plan. This identifies when it's safe to spread livestock manures. And there is a lot of information as well as a lot of support for farmers in managing their use of slurry and guidance on storage and management options. Farming Connected, a lot of stuff out there. So that there is some support and funding as well, but obviously with the increase in dairy herds in particular, having upgraded storage requirements for your slurry is not a cheap thing. It's, you know, so that's why you know, the farming industry have sort of been very worried about increased regulations. So nitrate vulnerable zones, most people have heard about, and it's been a very topical thing over the last few years. So legislation is effectively stronger in nitrate vulnerable zones, where there are certain sort of enforcements. So as well as a minimum of 5 months of slurry storage, farms within an NBZ cannot spread slurry during a closed period. And there's also sort of an upper limit of total nitrogen that could be spread on the land. But back in 2017, the Welsh Government stopped short of extending nitrate vulnerable zones, and Welsh Government also sort of said that they wanted to give the agriculture industry some sort of flexibility to be able to achieve what nitrate vulnerable zones could achieve through legislation, but they could do that possibly even better with voluntary measures. So this has been an ongoing conversation for quite some years now. And on the one hand, you've got support for more legislation, calls from environment groups for more legislation. You know, there's often you know, media reports about fish kills and things like that in the papers. just recently we had a swimmer in a national park here in Pembrokeshire who was sort of shocked at the at becoming ill effectively through swimming through slurry within the national park. But yes, it happens all over. It's a very widespread problem, and it is widespread because it is a difficult one. So on the one hand, Welsh Government need to sort of toe the line with environmental legislation, but on the other, there has to be a balance struck with the agricultural industry. So farmers, are under economic pressure. They can't suddenly up their storage requirements without some sort of cash input. So I'm more used to sort of fishermen, and I find it very similar to the fishing industry in that there are extra environmental controls wanted, and in the fishing industry you've got gear and quota recommendations that are given, but the industry has a very loud voice, and so any practical restrictions are sort of basically are delayed and limited, and I sort of see that on the land now with the agriculture industry. But it is clear that Welsh Government is stuck between a rock and a hard place, and that is why things are taking time to solve. So what have we been expecting? We've been expecting things, and then they're not appearing. First of all, is MBZ's big question mark. Could we see the current agriculture code of practice becoming statutory? Would legislation include closed seasons? Would every farm get a statutory pollution prevention visit? Is there going to be a maximum nitrogen limit per hectare? These are all question marks. And Welsh Government has been very busy. There are proposals for future support for the agriculture industry, but this is going to be tied to, as I understand it, tied to sustainable land management, where sustainable farmers will be rewarded. But food sustainability and good environmental standards are becoming increasingly more important in order to stay competitive. And that's really a bit of a driver. Sorry, there's lots of words here, but it might be handy to come back to this as reference later on. Welsh Government, got a busy programme, economic analysis. They're doing an awful lot of online, or have done online surveys and one-to-one sessions with farmers to explore practicalities. There's going to be workshops later in the year, and basically before the end of this Senate term, which is it's kind of May 2021. Welsh Government intends to publish a white paper to pave the way for an introduction of an agricultural Wales bill during the next Senate term. Natural Resources Wales, obviously advisor to government, have been saying over the years that as well as promoting a productive and profitable farming system, we should also simultaneously reduce risks to the environment. And take a holistic view. It's not just about Welsh Government food and health policies. There's also sort of like requirements under national natural resource management, having an area-based approach, taking the Environment Wales Act into consideration and things like that. I put this slide up because I found it really useful. This is actually part of a resource that's come from LEAF and Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum for GCSE students, and I kind of thought this is really good. This kind of summarises a bit of a situation. So we understand that it's a big issue. It's not going to be solved overnight. It hasn't been solved overnight, and Welsh Government are in an awkward position, trying to deal with industry, but also having the environmental controls necessary to make improvements. So where do you go? You could penalise farmers, in which case, okay, it's clear and decisive, but farmers could go out of business, bad relations with farmers, politically damaging. So that's not a great option. You could reward farmers for environmental benefits, which is good, working with them, not against them, but that's expensive. And who's going to pay for that? And you've also got to be careful not to be seen to be paying the industry for doing things that they should be doing anyway. And then there's the option of more public education. and more expensive food. Basically, you know, we as consumers, if we paid more to ensure that we've got, you know, food coming from, you know, that is produced sustainably, and, you know, the environment is not being harmed as a result of that, that's going to cost more. But many people already can't afford to eat properly. And at the end of the day, the public aren't interested. If they can get cheap food, they don't want to bother looking for more expensive options. So it's you know, it's really not easy. But you know, the future then. So it's frustrating. It's hard to plan ahead. It's frustrating for both the agriculture industry and those who work in the environment. There doesn't seem to be any let off in pollution events, and obviously no farmer wants to be responsible for failure of a bathing water beach or something. So in Pembrokeshire, you know, where tourism and recreation is so important, and relies upon good quality land and seascapes, you know, it's important that this is sorted out. But I think, you know, Welsh Government obviously are, you know, doing a lot with the agriculture industry at the moment, and I just hope we can get to somewhere soon to make the environmental improvements that are really needed. Okay, I'll leave it there. I think if there's any questions on policy and regulations, obviously I'm not the best one to answer that, but that's something that maybe we can pass on if it's needed. Okay, I shall stop sharing there. Okay, thank you.
Very much, Sue. Questions are coming in quite well now, but if you've got things you want to have addressed at the end of Anne's talk, please put them into the chat, or you can use the Q&A function, and we're keeping an eye on both of those. So I'd like to hand over now to Anne Bunker. I'm sure she's familiar to many of the audience. She's the Senior Marine Conservation Officer at NRW, and she's going to explain how this project applies to the marine environment and how the results will be used. So just a couple of moments while Anne gets her presentation set up, and then like lightning, she is ready. Okay, so I'll hand over to you now, Anne.
That's unusual for me, so let's hope it'll continue. Great, welcome to everybody. I'd like to start off by saying what a great project this is, and it's really surpassed our expectations. And that's really thanks to Sue for making a little idea blossom into this amazing big project. So great, it's really good. So my aim in this little section now is to make you aware of how useful the data is, what we've used it for in NRW, and the spin-offs that the work has generated. So we know that the waterway experiences high levels of nutrients, and we've known that for a long time. And if you look at the catchment and the land use, it's not surprising. You can see why that might be. And a long time ago in CCW, we talked about the issues of the high levels of nutrients and realised that we had some gaps in our knowledge. This is a map that shows the statutory monitoring that NRW does for various directives, including the Habitats Directive and the Water Framework Directive. So we do monitoring in lagoons, we do sublittoral sediments, rocky shores, Water Framework Directive fish work. We look at water quality, opportunistic macroalgae, seagrass, oysters, merle, loads of stuff, and also nitrates and phosphates on a monthly basis. But that's all upstream, and a few points for nitrates and phosphates in the main body of the waterway. So what we realised then from that map was that we didn't really know where the nitrates and phosphates that we knew were present were coming into the waterway. And from the map that we've seen just now, you can see that there's an awful lot of foreshore in the waterway, and it's really difficult to get a handle on all the little runoffs and tributaries and things that are coming into the waterway. And it would have always been impossible for NRW to get around to all that area to have a look. So that's why the SWEP data has been so fantastically useful, because it's filled the gaps. It's filled the gaps that's enabled us now to get a much better handle on where nitrates and phosphates are coming into the waterway. So for the statutory monitoring and legislation, we're required by law to monitor the water quality. And that has shown that the dissolved organic nitrates are way too high and that the Haven is hypernutrified. And to be compliant with the current Water Framework Directive regulations, we need to improve the current status, which is moderate, to good status by 2027. So at the moment, we've got a long way to go before we can get to good status, but these results will help us focus our attention into the right places. And as well as failing to meet the Water Framework Directive targets, many of the species and habitats that need to be protected because they're designated as part of the Pembrokeshire Marine SAC are in unfavourable condition. And the land runoff is a major contributory factor in this unfavourable condition. Natural Resources Wales, Pembrokeshire County Council, Pembrokeshire Coast National Park Authority and Drwy'r Cymru Welsh Water and the Milford Haven Port Authority all have a legal duty to look after the SAC, and with that to avoid deterioration of the habitats and significant disturbance of species. So the most obvious impacts are these sheets of green opportunistic macroalgae. So when we're talking about macroalgae or opportunistic algae, we're mainly talking about the different green species that you see making a carpet, particularly over the mudflats. This can be a variety of different species, but lots of them are in the group that we tend to call gutweeds and sea lettuces, or the Ulva genus. So the effects of this is that it smothers salt marsh plants, it forms a mat over mudflats and eelgrass beds, and that can impede the feeding of birds. And eventually we get the rotting of the mats, which forms a horrible anoxic layer underneath the seaweed, and that consumes the available oxygen and it can suffocate out other marine life. So if you see an area of mudflat like this that's covered in green and you wade out amongst it and put your hand underneath and lift it up, you often get a really unpleasant smelling black layer underneath. We've had complaints about that as well, because rafts can get detached, and the rafts of matted green seaweed can get entangled with propellers of boats, and it can also interfere with fishing and aquaculture, and fishermen have complained about their nets becoming clogged. Another effect is that we can have blooms of algae. We tend not to get that in the marine environment so much. It's more of a thing that happens in the freshwater environment. And we have seen that in some of our lagoons, which are just brackish. But it does occur sometimes in the Haven, and sometimes in the upper reaches of the Pembroke River, for example, we get algal blooms, which is where unicellular algae produce a lot of biomass, and it can end up like a thick green soup. That phenomenon is usually phosphate induced, and sometimes the harmful algal bloom can be toxic. If it's toxic, it can kill animals and it can produce rashes and illnesses in humans. So if you go somewhere and you see that the water is thick and green, be careful, because you can't tell from looking at it whether it's producing toxins or not. So one of the other things that happens with an algal bloom is, with the water becoming less clear, less sunlight can get through to the seabed, and that can restrict the growth of other plants and seaweed growth. So things like seagrass can be badly affected by that. My right place in the notes. So another effect on the marine environment is the sediments that come in with it, with the runoff from the land. So the sediments are comprised of solid material that can be transported by water, and is usually soil particles and sand and that kind of thing. But along with that, other particles can attach themselves to those sediments. Things like heavy metal, for example, are often associated with sediments. And so what tends to happen in the Milford Haven Waterway is that areas of very fine sediments also become contaminated with heavy metals. And the Milford Haven Waterway Environmental Surveillance Group has done a lot of monitoring around the haven and demonstrated those results. So other kinds of pollutions that can come in are things like paint flecks and asphalt particles, contamination like bacteria and viruses and protozoa, as well as the nutrients that we've been talking about, and the heavy metals and sometimes pesticides. And suspended sediments can also clog fish gills and affect fish growth. So it's definitely something that we don't want an excess amount of. Here we've got some lovely images from the Dicleddau. So the Dicleddau estuary is a very special place. It's a ria, a long, narrow inlet. It's deep and it contains rocky reef. And many of the marine species that live on rocky reefs are filter feeders, and they can be smothered by sediment runoff. And there's a little infographic which demonstrates the sunlight being filtered out by particles and therefore less seaweed and seagrass growth. The Pembrokeshire Marine Special Area of Conservation has a lot of habitats and species so as features. So there's 8 habitat features and 7 species features, and that's a lot. That's why the area has been designated as one of the best in Europe for its marine wildlife. And all except the habitats and species that are in the dark orange in the text occur in the Milford Haven Waterway. And all of those features are affected by water quality. So water quality is one of the most important things that we need to get right in order to protect our special area of conservation. For the background legislation on this, the EU Habitats Directive, if we don't improve the water quality, we will be failing to make the necessary improvements to habitats and species that we're meant to protect. And we'd also fail to meet the regulations of the Water Framework Directive. Here we've got a slide that shows some of the kinds of inputs into the waterway. So we've got the freshwater streams, various pipes and little runoffs, some of which you can see even from this photograph are polluted. That is one of the difficulties of looking for nitrate and phosphate pollution, is it's dissolved in the water, but we can't see it. We can only see the impacts. And of course, the impacts that it causes are often not immediately where the contaminated water is coming in. This is a different version of the map that Sue showed earlier. It's giving the nitrate data from December 2018 and January 2019. And it really highlights some of the hotspots of where we've got a lot of nutrients coming in. And this level of detail has helped our staff on the ground when they're targeting their site visits. So like Simon and the other members of the Pembrokeshire Environment team, they've been able to look at the map and see that certain areas have higher nitrate pollution than others, and consistently over the period of the survey. And one of the important things that this data revealed to us, which we weren't really aware of, we knew that there was nitrate and phosphate coming in, but we didn't realise the extent of it. And it turns out that almost every little trickle that was sampled had nitrates and or phosphates in, to varying levels. But that's a really important and quite worrying piece of information, that even a little spring that Simon tested very close to the edge of the waterway, where the water wasn't directly running off, but it was bubbling up, even that had very high nitrate levels. So we've got a situation where not only have we got nitrate directly running off from the land, but we've also got probably the water table being fairly saturated as well. So the action that we need to take that's probably going to take quite a long time to reduce nitrates and phosphates coming into the waterway, but certainly highlights that we need to act now. I'm just going to move on to a different section of the talk, so I just need to exit this one and hopefully move not quite so seamlessly into the next one. Here we go. All right, so the SWEP results have been and are continuing to be used. So as I've already said, they've helped with prioritising the farm visits and things like that. They've contributed to the classification of the waterway as a priority catchment, which is fantastic. And I've got some particular notes here to read to you that are hot off the press about what we're doing. So the results have shown that there's high levels of nutrients around the Sandy Haven catchment, and you saw that on the map. And with these results, we put forward that this area should be an opportunity catchment, which means it's a priority for our work. And we've got that, so that's fantastic. We've now received funding to scope a catchment survey to be carried out by the Rivers Trust. So that's excellent news as well. And further funding will be sourced to investigate the results of the scoping survey. And then finally, actions will be implemented to reduce point and diffuse sources of pollution after the investigation. So that's really good news that we've used the results to target some further action. This slide is just to highlight that there's an awful lot of work going on with and by other organisations. So it's not just NRW, it's a lot of people that are working together, and all of this evidence is giving a really good base for us to be able to hopefully put in some actions. Some additional benefits of the SWEP survey results. Well, obviously time in the field is extremely valuable, and it's something that in NRW we would like to do more of, but we just don't have the resources to get out and about enough. So I think that's the most valuable thing from this project is that it's allowed a lot of hours to be put into actually being out there, being on the ground and having a look at what's going on. It's helped us to get to know and understand the area much better, and I hope for the volunteers involved that it's helped all of you as well. And although the SWEPT was driven by water quality, there's been lots of other data produced as well, which is really excellent that we've got other things that we've been able to act on as well. So we've had photos of water input, which can provide a historical record for use in future comparative studies. As Sue already highlighted, marine plastics and debris have been recorded, and there was a special place on the recording form for putting those kind of things in, which I think turned out to be really useful. Lots more information on human activity, some more information on non-native species and where they're found, both terrestrial and marine, and some more information on otter activity. So that's great because otters are a feature of the SAC as well. So it's really nice to know that they're about and get some more information on where they're active. There's quite a few places around the waterway with this kind of site, but they're not the kind of places that people usually visit. So again, the SWEPT survey was really useful in getting people to the lesser known parts of the waterway that are generally hidden from sight. And thanks to the Pembrokeshire Coastal National Park, as a result of this, they were able to put on a big river clean in 2019. And the big river clean, well, look at it, you can just look at the poster and you see there were 10 events. There were 8 sites cleaned, loads and loads of plastic bottles and glass recycled, lots of cans, 91 volunteers, a fantastic effort. So well done to the National Park for doing that. And some of the SWEPT volunteers also joined in with that project. So that was nice for that to happen as well. But it also brought in some extra people. So again, that spread the awareness of the project and the pollution problems in the waterway. What I think is particularly commendable about this project, as you can see on the poster, is that quite a lot of the material that was collected has been recycled, so that's great. There are, however, many areas that haven't been cleaned, so good job, there's some more cleans planned. And yeah, and before I move on to the boat thing, we need changes in behaviour to stop that kind of thing, because the cleans are great, but the cleans are not actually stopping new material coming into the waterway, either from the rivers and land or of course from the sea and then washing up. And interestingly, I found in a few places some of those buckets that came ashore at Freshwater West have floated all the way up the waterway and are now stuck under trees right up in the Pembroke River. So we know that stuff comes in from the sea as well. The abandoned boat issues. Well, there's some follow-up on that. We knew that there were abandoned boats around, and we've known it's a problem for a long time. But the data from the SWEPT project made us realise that it was much more of an issue than we'd thought previously. And you can see the kind of state of things from the photograph. So it's not simple. You can't just go and remove a boat because it belongs to someone. And there's legal and waste disposal complexities that have to be considered. And the Port Authority have been looking at this in the past as well. But as a result of some extra data from the SWEPT project, we've now got a new project that's using Welsh Government Capital Fund money and managed by NRW to look at the necessary legislation and the methods so that we can remove some of the vessels. And there'll be a report on that next year. So that's another positive spin-off. So I think you'll have found out by now, if you didn't know about the project before, that the SWEPT project has been a fantastic example of both collaboration and cooperation. In NRW, we can't be everywhere at once. And so having all these volunteers going out and being eyes and ears on the shore and collecting all this data has been fantastic for us. And it's enabled us to prioritise where our efforts are going to have the biggest impact. And as Sue said at the beginning of her presentation, she is the officer for all the relevant authorities who have statutory duties within the site. So that means that all the relevant authorities have signed up to this project, which is great. So I'd like to thank all the volunteers for doing such a good job and enabling NRW to use this data. And what we hope now is that with the ongoing work in NRW and some of the other ongoing spin-off things, we can actually make a difference to reduce the amount of nitrates and phosphates and litter and all the other problems in the Milford Haven Waterway. And hopefully in the future we can reduce that, and hopefully we can get some of our features into favourable condition. That's the main aim. So that's me done. Thank you to everybody. I need to escape and stop sharing now, don't I? Stop share. There we are.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne. So we've had quite a few different questions come in, and we'll start to work our way through those. So I'll pull the ones off on the chat. If you would like to, Alex, can people raise their hand, or if you'd like to pop, if you've got a question, just alert us to the fact that you'd like to ask one, and I think Alex can
Yeah, no problem.
So we'll start off with a few of the earlier questions. So there was a question from Nick Broden, and he was asking about the accuracy of the test kits that we use during SWEPT.
Yeah, so the accuracy of the tests, as I sort of said very briefly, we did make some comparisons. We got NRW to compare the SWEPT test tubes, the pack test tubes results against their statutory monitoring sort of lab analysis. And unsurprisingly, they weren't as accurate, but if anything, they did under-record very slightly. But I think we sort of basically, the bottom line is we thought they were accurate enough. They certainly flag where there is pollution. So I think the main thing is, you know, you're not necessarily, you know, is it this amount polluted or this amount polluted? Within kind of pollution boundaries, is it polluted or not? Is it very polluted or not? Within those sorts of scales, you know, they're absolutely fit for purpose. So I think that's what you need, especially when you're doing sort of like large landscape style surveys. So we're very pleased with how they worked out, basically. Yeah,
they gave us the right ballpark figure, didn't they?
Yeah, and of course they are cheaper than going down the lab route.
Yeah, and even with lab samples, of course, even if they are really accurate, for this kind of work, you don't need that kind of accuracy, because the amount of nitrate in your sample is going to be varying continuously depending on the water flow. You just need to know where your major sources of nutrients are coming in. And they were nice and easy to use as well, weren't they? Which was great.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got another question here from Jeremy Wadier. And his question is, where would you get the test packs from to be able to test other Pembrokeshire rivers? And are there any plans to do that? I guess.
Yeah, well, so the test tubes, they're manufactured and they come from Japan. So you have to have a bit of lead-in time if you want to order some. So I've put that sort of information in the report appendices. But basically, yes, anyone can order them. Obviously, the more you order, the cheaper it works out. Don't forget to add in customs and sort of like delivery costs. Yeah, so sort of planning for sort of about a 60-day lead-in time. We have got some tests that that need using up over this winter because they only have a certain shelf life. So basically, if there are areas that people are wanting testing, we do have some tests and we can sort of direct them to areas that anyone flags up as thinking there's a concern. So as I alluded to sort of very briefly in my presentation, there are sort of, there's discussions underway at the moment for hopefully a catchment project towards the north of the county, and there's also a project that I've got running with the National Park Rangers, and they're going to be looking at some of the open coast sites, but also we're going to get a couple of repeats within the waterway itself, and I'll probably be approaching some of the SWEP volunteers to see if they want to help out with that in the next week or two.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I've just posted the link to the report in the chat, but if I haven't, we can make sure that goes up before the end of the session.
That's in there, Tim. I did that earlier as well. Yeah, so basically if you just go to the Pembrokeshire Marine SAC website, it's on the latest news page. You'll find a link.
Okay, next question is from Zoe Henderson, which says, were you able to communicate the impacts to the people taking the samples?
I'll jump in. You can add to that if you want, Anne, but I'll just jump in and basically say that.
Let me just get that. I quickly scribbled out, so apologies, Zoe. I've probably not done your question, Zoe, justice here. Were you able to help people understand the impacts caused when tests showed higher levels of pollution? I guess what was done?
Yeah, I guess what we're doing today is kind of as part of that, really, Zoe. But yes, Sue had, well, Sue, you can talk about this. You had various events before and during the sampling and things, didn't you, to go through those kind of things?
Yeah, and we did also stress with participants that if they obviously if it was a pollution concern, that they would raise it directly through the NRW hotline. But if they were just getting a high result, that it wasn't going to be unexpected, just to record it and sort of let us know. And obviously there were 4 months of collecting data, and after each recording event, after each month, I would get the data coming in. So I was able to see from month 1, that there was a lot of high results coming in and where they were tending to be. And so in the information pack and the training that we gave to volunteers, they were aware of the impacts of that on the marine environment. Obviously they were looking at for algal mat as well. Algal mat is one of the sort of most obvious, as Anne was explaining, one of the most obvious results of nitrate pollution in the waterway. I was going to add something else then. Do you want to add to that, Anne? I've just forgotten what I was going to say.
No, I don't think so. Does that answer your question, Zoe?
Like, take a couple of moments. Zoe lets us know in the chat. That'll be. I think that's yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've got perhaps a quick question for either of you now. On David Gardner, have Thwaite shad, Alice shad, sea lamprey, or river lamprey been seen in the catchment in recent years? And that's from David Gardner.
That's a good question, but I think the answer is not much. Although there are a few results and a few sightings, but not very much. But not really part of the project, David. So I don't know if you'd like to know. I think send a message to NRW and we can send you any information we've got on it.
would that be a Milford Haven Waterway observation group type data?
No.
No, okay. Okay, so another question here from Ben Williams. It says, great to hear resources being secured to target Sandy Haven catchment. However, that is low down a catchment. In a time of limited resources, would it not be better to target a catchment higher up that has a greater influence on the waterway?
As I understood it, Anne, the opportunity catchment was like the whole area. So I think, you know, the fact that there's a separate sort of mini project happening on the Sandy Haven catchment, I think that's not saying that nothing is going to happen upriver either. The fact that it's an opportunity catchment means that there's, as Anne was saying, there's greater resource to tackle other areas too. I think there is other work being planned upriver as well.
Yes, I think that's the case. That's not within my remit, so I don't know whether one of my NRW colleagues that's on would like to type a fuller answer to that, perhaps.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to Ethan Cook. Apologies if you've already addressed this in your presentations already, but will the Milford Haven Waterway be assessed again for nitrate vulnerable zone status in the event that the management measures are not effective?
I think that's a Welsh Government question.
Okay.
I was going to let you answer that, but yeah. No, I think it's just still a big question mark, isn't it? So it's obviously what the consultations that Welsh Government and discussions that Welsh Government are having at the moment. That's what it's all about, isn't it? It's whether that ends up being the final tool or not.
Okay, so I think that's the questions and answers from the, oh no,
More
just come in. Okay, so this is from Jeremy Wadier, and it is, do you have any project surveys planned in northwest Pembrokeshire, for instance, the St David's Peninsula? Then feel free to drop me a note, as it really rallies the troops and a relatively new community group called EQ Dowie. You can reach me and his contact details are there.
Oh, great. Thank you very much for that.
Got any projects that would be useful to link up with, or community groups that might volunteer, please put those in the chat, and because we'll keep the chat log and so we'll be able to refer to that.
That'd be great. Thank you for that. Yeah, as I said, there's a very small low-key project that I'm just doing with the National Park and the Rangers, and we're trying to keep that fairly low-key because, you know, there's no major resource to sort of put to that in terms of organisation and writing up, and also because some of our current tubes that we have, the phosphate ones, are sort of running out next month, so it's a case of getting out there quick before their shelf life expires, and so that's why we're basically using some of the rangers and possibly some of the existing SWEP volunteers to sort of make use of them. There might be some other things that later on in the year and into the spring, and we can keep folk informed about that.
Okay, so the questions are coming in now. So we've got a technical question from David Ord. So the SWEP survey was measuring nitrate concentrations, but also measured the dimensions of water ingress. Have the relative nitrate loads of the inputs been calculated?
Good question. No, they haven't, David. But you know, the data is there because obviously we had information on sort of, you know, flow and things like that. You know, that's a big piece of work to sort of drill down, but the fact that we have that data, it's there if somebody sort of wanted to take it that far. There had been some existing or previous studies looking into you know, portion, I can't remember what the terminology is, of yeah, the proportion that's coming in from different places. So there is some understanding there, but I think the fact that we've got all of that data sitting there, it can be interrogated if somebody wanted more detail. But I think what we have is we have, you know, just flagged up a lot of the hotspots. So I think that's enough to sort of go on for the time being. You agree, Anne?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good question, and it's worth pointing out that there is a lot more that could be done with the data, if anybody's interested in doing some more with it. That would be nice. Again, it's a time and resources issue. And the other thing to say is it's actually very, very difficult to measure the volume when you go and see the little trickles coming in, because you can't measure the diameter and the depth of the runoff very easily when it's coming through salt marsh, for example, and it's twisting and turning and it's really shallow, or it sort of goes underneath another bit. It's just a hard thing to do to be accurate. That's all. But yeah, but it'd be great if somebody could do some more things with the data, wouldn't it?
Okay, so moving on now to a question from John Whitehurst. It says sewage treatment outflows and discharges are regularly in the news and have not been particularly noted through SWEPT. Are there known problems in the Haven catchment?
And you want to answer that one? I mean, all I'll say
is trying to understand what was the first bit. It was about sewage treatments and.
Yeah, are there any known sewage treatment problems in the Milford Haven catchment?
Oh, I see. Well, there are a few small issues with some sewage treatment things, but that's not the main thing that's at issue that we knew about before, that we found out. It's more runoff that we were detecting in this survey.
And I will say, when it comes to the sort of sewage treatment works and things like that, that's phosphate tends to be more of an issue there, because whereas the nitrates are primarily from sort of like agricultural runoff, phosphates tend to be more from your detergents and things like that, which is why they're picked up more, possibly, or at higher concentrations from sewage treatment works and things like that.
Another thing, of course, is that things like sewage treatment works are regulated, so they are regularly monitored and inspected, which is a different issue to the things that we were looking at, which are not regulated.
Okay, thank you. And so there's a question here from David Ramsey for Anne, which is possibly outside the scope of the SWEPT project. So can you tell us some of the methods used to reduce nitrate levels in Sandy Haven, particularly point source? Or we can come back with an answer another time. Anne?
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm not able to do that because we've only just started looking at it, and it will be the local environment team who will be doing that.
Okay.
But good question, and hopefully sometime in the future we'll be able to tell you that. So do come back to us later on if you would like some more detail.
And there's another one here from Sandy Haven, and it's a question or a comment from Ross Greasebrook. Do apologise if I got your name wrong. It says, hi, RE Opportunity Catchments. We chose Sandy Haven as it is bathing water and has intensive poultry farming too. We are also looking at the Millin Pill further upstream, as it's put under WFD for fish, salmonids, and eels. So I don't know if that helps.
Thank you very much, Ross, for the detail. That's great.
And finally, a question from David Ord. You've concentrated the commentary in the presentation on nitrate results. Do the results suggest phosphate concentrations to be a non-issue?
Yeah, thanks for giving me a chance to expand a bit on that. So the phosphate results we had, they didn't indicate that we had very high concentrations in lots of areas, like the nitrate. The slight sort of like health warning that comes with that, in that we didn't realise until too late that the phosphate tests, well, actually both tests are recommended at certain, the water needs to be at a certain temperature range. I think for the nitrate, it's sort of like 15 to 40 degrees centigrade, and for the phosphate, it's 20 to 40 degrees centigrade. So we were doing it over the winter, and there was certainly snow on the ground for one of those surveys. So it's highly likely that the water that we were testing was colder than that, and that affects the phosphate tests a bit more. It wouldn't affect the colour change, but it does affect the time that the reagent needs to react. So in my little demo, it's 5 minutes, which is when you need to look at the colour change. But the tubes will continue to go on changing colour. And here we have the nitrate one here and the phosphate one here. I mean, they don't look too different to when I showed you, but they will darken a little bit over time. And it's sort of recommended in the sort of fine print that for the phosphate, it may even take up to 20 minutes for an accurate colour change if you're dealing with very low temperature water. So the advice is to basically warm, even just hold a sample of water in your hands for a little while in a container, obviously, and to bring it up to temperature before you then do your 5 minute or 3 minute test. And because we haven't done that in our survey, we feel that it's quite likely that the phosphate could have been under recorded. But having said that, if you scale it all up slightly to make allowances for that, there still aren't many areas where we think we would have got a very high phosphate pollution sort of result, much different to the nitrate. So obviously for us, nitrate came out as the bigger issue, but that's not to say that you know, we shouldn't disregard phosphate as an issue for the waterway.
Yeah, quite right. Yeah.
Okay, so there are two more questions that I've got here. Lorna, I just need to zip up to the top of the chat to find yours. But in the meantime, Rodri asked a question, and he's put in brackets the end, which I think is relevant, as an ex-Welsh water worker. So it says water treatment works are not necessarily monitored that well, and every time they're cleaned, they release a lot of sludge and contaminated water. Do we know exactly the impacts of local water treatment plants are? I can see a shake of the head there.
Well, yeah, that's not really my remit, but I suspect not.
I know that something that did come back through the project and participants. I mean, certainly lots of our volunteers were sort of local, and a lot of them were actually sort of like putting their hand up to take part because they had concerns. I know there was some of the smaller outfalls and sewage outfalls. You know, our volunteers had their own concerns about, which is why they were particularly keen to see some results coming from them. So yeah, I think we flagged up a couple of one of the smaller outflows that they were producing sort of like elevated levels. But I think against everything that we have, they were just sort of like a small part of the overall picture.
Yeah.
Okay, and I still can't find Lorna's questions. I can see lots of really valuable contributions she's made in the chat. You wouldn't mind just posting it into the latest chat thing for me, Alex?
I can say it in person if you want.
Far away.
So Lorna is asking, she's wondering, how did you decide what were the best times to sample to capture an accurate representation of what was occurring on the ground when only sampling occasionally?
Thank you, Lorna. It's something that I haven't covered. It's obviously covered in the report, but yeah, it's good to bring it up now. So two parts to that, but when to sample. NRW basically, you know, we asked that question of NRW when we were sort of putting the project together, and the answer that came back was, if you're wanting to pick up signs of nitrate and phosphate, then it's best to sample over the sort of like autumn winter period. That's when you're getting most runoff coming off the land, and that's when you're most likely to pick up signs of nitrate and phosphate pollution. So that's why we chose November, December, January and February. When the results did come back in, we obviously looked to see if there was any variation between months, and there was no statistical significant difference between those months. Obviously, each time you go out, you are only getting a snapshot, and that can depend on, you know, how much rain there's been and things like that. we did find that, so we didn't find that there was any significant difference between those months. So that's interesting. And to me, that indicates that if you were to go and repeat it, even just 1 month or 2 months worth of data is very valuable. You don't have to do it over, 4 repeat visits. And the other thing was that we did find that we had the highest levels of nitrate and phosphate results tended to coincide with the periods of heavy rainfall, just roughly. Yeah, thanks for that, Lorna. That's an important point to raise. I think that even like a one-off survey is still a valuable snapshot, and I would sort of, in terms of, sort of resources and stuff like that, I would still recommend that.
Any data is better than no data, isn't it? Yeah. I just posted up the NRW incident line so that if anyone does spot a pollution incident or something that's not wrong in the SAC, they can phone the incident line.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that is it for the questions in the comment and the Q&A now. So I can just see the number changing, but we will go through these. So if there's anybody left with points that we haven't answered, we will get to that. We will leave. Yeah,
we can contact you, individually if anything comes up afterwards. And obviously anybody that's taking part either now or afterwards, if you've got any questions, please feel free to get in touch, and we can answer that for you.
Yeah, and we can leave the room open a couple of minutes after we kind of close. So if you've got any feedback or comments you want to leave in the chat, it'll be available to you to do that.
Tim, this has been recorded, hasn't it? So I think I'll try and organise to put a link to that, probably in the same place as the SWEP report on the SAC website. That needs a big overhaul, which I'm not sure when that's going to happen. It's one of the things on the to-do list. But I think for now, I'll try and organise after this to get a link alongside where the reports are on the latest news page. I'll get a link to these presentations on there too.
That'd be good, yeah.
Great, well, thank you. So unless there's anything further you want to add, Sue, or shall we bring this to a close? And thank you very much both for sharing your expertise and knowledge this morning. It's really interesting.
Thank you for hosting us.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you everyone for sort of checking in, and again, thank you to all the SWEP volunteers. It wouldn't have been possible without you. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, and really great, all the participation. It's great to feel like there are people out there that are engaging and wanting to know more and ask lots of questions. That's really, really great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
So I'm just hanging on a couple of minutes here, Tim, just in case anything comes up. But I think participants are sort of dropping off now. So hopefully everyone feels like they've had the info that they were wanting from the session.
Yeah.
I think as a webinar, it's really good. Yes, it was unfortunate that we didn't have our physical event back in March, but this has enabled many more people to take part, I think, which is a silver lining.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you still doing something? Yeah.
Okay, right. Some nice thanks coming in from people there. It's nice to see.
Yeah. It's nice to have it recorded, isn't it? Or useful to have it recorded, people's comments and feedback.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I also sort of shared it with some marine protected area contacts sort of in England, and yeah, hopefully that might mean that they're keen to do similar things elsewhere, which is really good to know.
Yeah.
What did you want to do with the last two questions that popped up? Do you want to answer those separately? Because I'm not sure if we've got people's emails.
What were those questions?
Who have we got? They were quick at the end because we were definitely...
Yeah, I think there was a delay in the Q&As coming up in your session, but there was someone asking about how volunteers can stay in touch with progress and if SWEP will remain live. And then somebody else asking why you did testing from November to February.
Okay, well, I think we answered the why we did the testing in November one. And I did answer, I think, on a previous question about how the SWEP volunteers were going to be involved. I think, you know, basically it depends on where things end up occurring, you know, which areas are being targeted and whether we need that resource. So I think, yeah, I will make sure that I let the SWEP volunteers know if there are things happening, whether we need their help or not. Yeah. Okay, right. I think that looks to have come to a...
There we go. There are 7, so there must be 4 other people here somewhere.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, thanks, Tim. Thanks, Alex. Thank you for that.
Okay. No problem.
Great.
Fairly smoothly, hopefully. And yeah, I'll be in touch with you, and you'll have all that chat anyway, won't you? You'll be able to let me have that. Great.
We'll let you have a copy of that, and we'll find a way of getting the recording to you. It's quite a big file, just as a warning.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll have a chat about that after. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Sue.
Yeah.